On a cold autumn night, fate will bring two lives back together in a way neither could have predicted. Ethan Campbell, a powerful CEO, finds his carefully controlled world shattered when a familiar melody fills the air. Little does he know, the woman behind the song holds a secret that could change everything. What starts as an unexpected encounter quickly spirals into a storm of emotions, painful revelations, and buried truths. Are you ready for the twists and turns that await? Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Ethan Campbell sat alone at a sleek, polished table in the upscale restaurant, the hum of quiet conversation around him failing to penetrate his thoughts. The weight of the day still clung to his shoulders, despite the momentary reprieve of being away from the office. His eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen of his phone, scrolling through emails and reviewing the latest market trends with the cold precision he had perfected over the years. The world of high-tech business was unforgiving, and Ethan had no time for distractions, especially emotional ones. He had built his empire from the ground up, but at the cost of his personal life. His reputation as a ruthless CEO was well earned, and that was exactly how he liked it. His emotions had long since been buried beneath layers of success, never to be seen again. After all, feelings only got in the way of progress. As he sat there, his thoughts consumed with mergers and acquisitions, the soft sound of piano keys broke through the noise of the restaurant. A familiar melody drifted through the air, weaving its way into Ethan's mind. It was the kind of melody that had once been the soundtrack to his youth, a song he had composed himself. During a time when love and passion were all-consuming forces in his life, a time he had left far behind. His hand stilled on his phone as the tune filled the space around him. His gaze moved toward the piano, and that's when he saw her. Standing near the grand piano was a young woman, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. She was dressed in a simple uniform, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, but it wasn't her appearance that held Ethan's attention. It was the song, the same song that had once belonged to him and Emily. A jolt of recognition surged through him. His heart skipped a beat as memories flooded his mind, memories of Emily, his first love, and the time they had shared. Emily with her laughter, her warmth, her beauty, and the song they had written together during the summer when everything seemed possible, a time before life had torn them apart. His breath caught in his chest as he watched the woman play. Something about the way she held herself, the way the music seemed to flow through her, made him feel like he was watching a ghost, as if the past had come to life right in front of him. His heart raced as their eyes met. The woman's gaze locked onto his for a moment, and in that instant, everything else seemed to disappear. The bustling restaurant, the clink of silverware, the murmurs of other patrons, all of it faded into the background. All he could focus on was her. And then, just as quickly, she looked away. Ethan's pulse quickened. He couldn't look away. There was something hauntingly familiar about her. Something in the way she held herself. She was different, older, and yet it was unmistakable. Emily? No, it couldn't be. But as the last note of the song lingered in the air, Ethan was left with the undeniable sensation that the woman playing the piano was the same Emily he had once loved and lost. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unresolved emotions and unspoken words. Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't think. His mind raced as he tried to process what was happening, what this meant. Had he really found her again, after all these years? The woman finally turned and walked away from the piano, but her eyes lingered on Ethan for one final moment. It was a glance filled with years of unspoken history, of things left unsaid, of pain and longing that neither of them had ever truly forgotten. Ethan didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to react. But one thing was clear. His life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted. And then he saw it. Cradled in her arms, a child, a small boy, no older than 12. The sight of him made Ethan's heart stop. He stared at the child for a moment, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. His eyes widened as the pieces slowly began to fall into place. The boy was hers, but something about the child felt familiar. too familiar. The woman walked toward him. Ethan stood frozen, his mind whirling, his heart pounded in his chest as the truth began to sink in. The child, the boy, was his son. And suddenly, Ethan felt the full weight of everything he had lost. The life he could have had, the family that had been ripped away from him, the memories of Emily, and the choices he had made, the choices he had been forced to make. His legs felt like they were going to give out beneath him as he stared at the child, his son, the child he never knew existed, the child he had never been given the chance to meet. A million questions raced through his mind, but there was one question that stood out above the rest, one question that demanded an answer. Why? Why hadn't she told him? Why hadn't Emily given him the chance to be a part of his son's life? Why hadn't she ever reached out to him? Before Ethan could process any more, the woman, Emily, paused. She looked at him one last time, her expression unreadable, and then she turned to walk away. Ethan stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart in his throat. He had no idea what to do next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning, and he was determined to find out everything. But first, he had to face the one person he never thought he'd confront again. The days that followed felt like a blur to Ethan. He couldn't escape the image of Emily standing in front of him, a woman he had once loved, holding his son. His son. The words echoed in his mind, but they felt foreign, as if they didn't belong to his reality. For years, he had lived his life as though he had no family, no real connections beyond his business, and now, suddenly, everything had changed. He couldn't focus at work. His meetings, his phone calls, his emails, everything seemed distant and unimportant. All he could think about was the brief moment he had spent with Emily and the boy. The questions gnawed at him, each one more painful than the last. Why had she kept Lucas from him? Why hadn't she told him? He had every right to know, to be a part of his son's life. Ethan's thoughts spiraled, a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. How could Emily have raised their child without him? How could she have kept this secret from him for so long? It wasn't just Emily he needed answers from. It was his own mother, the woman who had always controlled every aspect of his life, who had always steered him toward his career, away from any personal distractions. He had been too young and naive to understand back then. But now the truth was clear. His mother had orchestrated his separation from Emily. She had kept him away from the woman he loved, and ultimately from the child he never knew existed. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of confrontation. He had to speak to Emily, to understand why she had never told him. But he also had to face his mother, the one person who had shaped his entire existence, for better or worse. His decision was made by the time he walked into his office the next morning. He would start with Emily. He would confront her, hear her side of the story, and find out why she had kept Lucas from him. Once he understood everything, then he would deal with his mother. He texted his assistant, instructing her to set up a meeting with Emily. He couldn't wait any longer. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Emily's silence was more than just a choice. It was a wound that had festered for years, and it was time to dig it out. The following afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting in a small, dimly lit cafe, waiting for Emily. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge of his coffee cup. He had never been one to feel nervous, but this felt different. This was personal. This was about his family, about everything he had lost. When Emily walked through the door, he was taken aback by how much she had changed. She was still beautiful, of course, but there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her face was tired, and her posture was guarded, as if she had built walls around herself to protect what little was left of her heart. Ethan stood as she approached, his throat dry, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't know how to start, what to say. All he knew was that he needed answers. Emily hesitated for a moment before sitting across from him. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him with warmth. She simply looked at him with a mixture of wariness and exhaustion, as though she had been waiting for this moment for years. "You wanted to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his gaze locked on hers. He could see the pain in her eyes, the same pain that had haunted him for so long. But there was something else too, something that resembled distrust. "Emily, I need to know why," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Why didn't you tell me about Lucas? Why didn't you let me be a part of his life?" Emily's eyes darkened at the mention of their son. She sat back in her chair, her arms crossing defensively over her chest. For a long moment she didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of years of unanswered questions. "I never wanted you to find out like this," Emily said finally, her voice strained. "I never wanted you to know the truth, but it wasn't my decision. It wasn't just my choice, Ethan. It was yours too." Ethan frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean? I never knew. How could I make a choice if I didn't even know?" Emily's gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "You don't understand. I didn't just keep Lucas from you. I did it because I was afraid. I was afraid of what would happen if you knew. If you came back into our lives, if you found out about him, everything would have changed. I couldn't risk that. I couldn't risk you not wanting us, and I couldn't risk your mother interfering." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "My mother?" Emily nodded, her face pale. "Yes, she knew about Lucas from the very beginning. She told me that if you knew, it would ruin your future. She said you couldn't be distracted by a family, by a child. She said your career was too important. I didn't want to believe it, but she had a way of convincing me. She told me that you'd never choose me, never choose us, and I couldn't lose you completely." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. His mother, the woman who had always seemed to have his best interests at heart, had been the one to manipulate him out of a life with Emily and their son. The betrayal stung, deeper than he ever thought possible. "Emily, I had no idea," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I never knew she did that. I never knew what was really going on." Emily's eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill over. "I know. And I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to keep you away from him, but I had to protect him. I had to protect myself. And I couldn't bring myself to reach out, not when I knew what would happen if you knew the truth." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. "I can't change the past, Emily, but I want to be a part of Lucas's life now. I want to make up for lost time." Emily didn't answer right away. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and hesitation, as though she wasn't sure whether she could believe him. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan," she said softly. "Not after everything. Not after what you've done, what your mother's done. It's not just about us anymore. It's about Lucas, and I won't let him get hurt." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had no right to ask for forgiveness, but he couldn't stand the thought of losing any more time with his son. "I'll prove it to you," he said, his voice steady. "I'll prove to you that I'm here for both of you, that I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Emily studied him for a long moment before finally speaking again. "I don't know if it will be enough, but we'll see." As she stood to leave, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much to fix, so much to heal. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. The days after his conversation with Emily passed slowly for Ethan. He could still feel the weight of her words, her guarded eyes, the quiet hesitation in her voice. She had made it clear that she wasn't ready to trust him again, not after everything that had happened. But Ethan wasn't a man accustomed to failure. He had spent his life achieving success, building an empire from nothing, and now, more than ever, he was determined to do the same for his family. His thoughts were consumed by Emily and Lucas. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces. The image of his son, his flesh and blood, haunted him, a constant reminder of the time lost. He could barely remember the last time he had felt something so raw, so real. His world had been cold, driven by ambition, but now everything had changed. The days at work were no easier. The endless demands of running his company seemed trivial compared to the deep ache in his chest. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a father, a man trying to repair the broken pieces of a life he didn't even know he wanted back until now. Every time he saw the face of his mother, he was reminded of the cruel truth he had learned from Emily, that his mother had orchestrated his separation from Emily. She had kept him from knowing about Lucas, out of fear that his personal life would distract him from the pursuit of his career. Ethan had never questioned her decisions before, never thought to challenge the woman who had been the guiding force of his life. But now, everything had changed. He had to confront her. He had to find out why she had done this, why she had manipulated his entire life and kept him from the one thing he truly wanted, a family. That afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found himself standing at the front door of his mother's mansion. The tall, imposing structure had always felt like a symbol of control, power, and perfection, everything his mother had taught him to value. But now, as he stood before it, it felt suffocating. He wasn't the same man who had walked through these doors so many times before. He was a man who had been stripped of his illusions, a man who had been forced to confront the truth about himself, his family, and his past. When the door opened, his mother greeted him with a practiced smile, the kind of smile that had always made Ethan feel like he was walking in the shadow of her expectations. "Ethan," she said warmly, stepping aside to let him in. "It's been too long. How are you?" Ethan didn't return the smile. His jaw clenched as he walked past her and into the foyer. The house was exactly as he remembered it, elegant, pristine, but somehow cold. His mother's presence was all around him, in the meticulously arranged furniture, in the gleaming surfaces, in the quiet hum of the house that always felt more like a performance than a home. "I need to talk to you," Ethan said, his voice low and serious. His mother's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course. Darling, let's sit down and talk. I made tea." Ethan didn't want tea. He didn't want pleasantries. He just wanted answers. He followed her into the sitting room, a space that had always felt too formal to him, a space where nothing ever seemed real. She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, his posture rigid with tension. "Mom, I know what you did," Ethan said, his voice cold, the words finally coming out, like a long-dreaded confession. "I know you kept me away from Emily. I know you knew about Lucas, and I know you manipulated everything." His mother's expression shifted, the warmth fading from her face. For a moment, there was only silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Then she sighed, as though she had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Ethan, you don't understand," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I did what I thought was best for you. You were on the verge of something big. Your career, your future was at stake, and I couldn't let anything interfere with that. You were so focused on success, on building your company, that I knew if you had known about Emily, about the baby, it would have changed everything. You would have become distracted, weak." Ethan's anger flared, but he swallowed it down. His mother had always justified her actions in the name of his success, in the name of his future. But now, hearing her words, it all seemed hollow. He felt like a pawn in her game, a pawn who had been manipulated for years. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You took away my chance to be a father. You took away the life I could have had with Emily. And for what? So I could become this cold, ruthless businessman with nothing but money and power to show for it." His mother's eyes hardened, and for a moment she looked like a stranger. The woman who had once been his everything, the woman who had taught him to be strong, to never show weakness, was now the woman who had robbed him of his chance to be a real person. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice rising. "I did it all for you, for your future. Everything I did was for your success. And now you're telling me I was wrong? That I ruined your life?" Ethan felt a sharp pang of hurt. "You didn't give me a chance. You didn't let me choose. You made the decision for me. And now I have a son I've never known. A son I've missed for 12 years. His mother's face softened slightly, but there was no remorse in her eyes. "You're right. I never gave you a choice. But it wasn't just about Emily. Ethan, it was about what I thought was best for you. I thought I was protecting you. Ethan's heart ached as he realized just how far his mother had gone to control his life. She had always believed that her version of protection was the only right way, and in doing so, she had stolen the one thing that truly mattered. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this," Ethan said quietly, the words like a weight in his chest. "But I need to fix this. I need to make things right with Emily and Lucas." His mother didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with something between disappointment and pity. "I can't stop you, Ethan," she said at last, her voice softer now. "But I want you to understand that you can't just walk away from everything we've built. This is your life now. You can't have it all." Ethan stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't stay here any longer. He had to move forward. He had to rebuild what he had lost, no matter the cost. "I'm done with you controlling my life," he said firmly. "This ends now." And with that, he walked out the door, leaving his mother and the life she had created for him behind. The path ahead would be difficult. The wounds of the past were deep, and the road to reconciliation with Emily and Lucas would be long. But Ethan was ready. He was ready to face the truth, to be the father he had never been, and to finally take control of his own future. Ethan's head was spinning as he left his mother's mansion. The conversation had left him feeling empty and unsettled, as though he had just uncovered a piece of himself that had been buried for years. His mother had never truly cared about the kind of man he wanted to be. She had only cared about the man she had molded him into, a man who followed her path, lived by her rules, and never questioned her decisions. And now, as he walked away, Ethan realized just how much of his life had been spent in a prison of her making. The car ride back to his apartment was a blur, his thoughts scattered, his chest tight with frustration and anger. He couldn't believe how much control she had over him for so long, but now it was time to make things right. He had to fix what had been broken. He had to face Emily and tell her the truth. He was ready to be a part of Lucas's life, no matter the cost. By the time he arrived home, it was late, the city lights casting long shadows across the empty streets. He barely noticed the quiet hum of the city as he sat at his desk, staring at his phone. He had texted Emily the night before, asking to meet, but she hadn't responded. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to see her, to talk to her face to face. After several long minutes of staring at the screen, Ethan picked up the phone and dialed her number. The ringing seemed to stretch on forever, each second pulling him deeper into his own anxiety. He hadn't expected her to answer, but when she did, it was like a weight lifted off his chest. "Ethan," she said, her voice tired but steady. "I didn't think you'd call." "I need to see you," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, and then she spoke again, softer this time. "I'm not sure it's a good idea, Ethan. After everything that's happened, I don't know if we can just talk." "I know, but I can't fix anything if we don't try," he replied. "Please, Emily, let me make it right." There was a long silence before she finally spoke again. "Where?" He gave her the address of a quiet park near his apartment, a place where they had spent time together when they were younger. It felt like the right place for this conversation. Calm, open, away from the distractions of the world. As he ended the call, Ethan felt a knot of fear in his stomach. Would she be able to forgive him? Would she trust him again? An hour later, he stood by the entrance of the park, his hands shoved in his pockets, his heart pounding. The cool night air brushed against his skin, and he wondered if this was the right thing to do. Could they rebuild the life they had lost? Could he convince her that he was truly ready to be a father to Lucas? Ethan didn't have the answers, but he knew he had to try. He had nothing left to lose. When Emily arrived, her steps were slow, deliberate, as though she wasn't sure what she was walking into. She was dressed simply, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. But there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of the woman he had once known, the woman he had once loved. She wasn't just a stranger to him. She was his past, his first love, and the mother of his child. She stopped a few feet away, looking at him carefully, assessing him, her eyes narrowed in caution. "You wanted to talk," she said, her voice wary. "So talk." Ethan swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. There was so much he wanted to say, so many apologies he needed to offer, but none of it seemed adequate. He had no excuses. He only had the truth. "Emily," he began, his voice rough, "I owe you an apology. For everything. For not being there when you needed me. For not being there for Lucas. For believing my mother's lies." She crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze never leaving his face. "And why should I believe you now, Ethan? After all these years, after everything, you can't just show up and expect me to forget." "I don't expect you to forgive me," Ethan said, his voice filled with regret, "but I need you to know that I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make things right. I want to be in Lucas's life. I want to be his father, and I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm willing to fight for him. For you." There was a flicker of something in Emily's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hesitation, but it quickly vanished, replaced by the same guarded look she had worn before. "You don't understand, Ethan," she said quietly. "It's not just about wanting to be a father. It's about the hurt, the betrayal. I've spent 12 years raising him alone. I've done everything I can to protect him. And now, after all this time, you want to come in and fix everything?" Ethan took a step toward her, his voice pleading. "I know I can't fix the past. I can't undo the hurt, but I want to be a part of his life. I want to be a father to him. I don't want to be the man who just walks away anymore." Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You think it's that simple? You think I can just let you walk in and be the father you never were? It's not that easy, Ethan." Ethan's heart clenched as he watched her struggle to hold back her emotions. He could see the pain in her eyes, the scars she had carried for so long. But he also saw something else. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was willing to give him a chance. "I'm not asking for you to forgive me right now," he said gently, stepping even closer. "But I'm asking for a chance. A chance to be there for you and Lucas. A chance to prove that I can be the man you need me to be." Emily's breath hitched as she looked at him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words, with the weight of the years that had passed. Finally, Emily let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Ethan, but I can't make this decision alone." Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't the resolution he had hoped for, but it was a start. He wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. For the first time in a long while, he had something worth fighting for. "I won't give up on you, Emily," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear I won't." As they stood there in the quiet of the park, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging between them, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more pain, more healing, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. The days following his conversation with Emily were a mix of fleeting hope and crushing uncertainty. Ethan spent hours thinking about the conversation in the park, replaying every word, every look she had given him. She hadn't outright rejected him, but she hadn't fully accepted him back either, and as much as he wanted to push for a faster resolution, he understood that trust was not something that could be regained overnight. Still, the fact that she had not shut him out completely was a small victory in itself. Ethan wasn't a man who easily gave up on something he wanted, and he wasn't about to start now. But the road ahead would be difficult, more difficult than anything he had ever faced in his life. He was fighting not just for Emily's forgiveness, but for Lucas's as well. His son, whom he had never known, and yet whose absence had haunted him every day since he had first learned of his existence. The guilt gnawed at him constantly. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of that boy, the boy who was a mirror of both him and Emily. He had missed out on so much, and the pain of it hit him in ways that nothing else ever had. Ethan knew what he had to do next. It wasn't just about making things right with Emily anymore. It was about building a relationship with Lucas. He had to show the boy that he was more than just a stranger. He had to prove that he was capable of being the father Lucas deserved, even if it meant facing more rejection, more hurt. He reached out to Emily again, asking if he could meet Lucas. He didn't expect her to say yes immediately, but he had to try. The thought of standing on the sidelines of his son's life, watching from afar, was more than he could bear. To his surprise, Emily responded positively, though there was still a hesitation in her tone. She agreed to meet him at a local park, a neutral ground, she had called it. Ethan arrived early, his mind racing with anticipation and fear. What would Lucas think of him? Would he be angry? Would he even want to meet the man who had been absent from his life for so long? As he waited, Ethan tried to calm himself, but his nerves were on edge. He wasn't used to this kind of uncertainty. He was used to being in control, to making the right moves in business, to getting things done. But this was different. This was personal. This was about redemption. It wasn't long before Emily arrived, walking slowly toward him with Lucas at her side. The boy was small for his age, but there was an undeniable resemblance between him and Ethan. His dark eyes, his tousled hair, the way he held himself, all of it reminded Ethan of the young man he had once been. The man he had been before ambition and control had taken over his life. "Lucas, this is your father," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with both caution and something else, something that Ethan couldn't quite place. The boy looked up at Ethan, his expression wary. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at him, his gaze cold and calculating, as though he were trying to figure out who this stranger was and what he wanted. Ethan felt his throat tighten as he looked down at his son. The words wouldn't come at first. How could he possibly explain the years of absence? How could he make this boy, this child, who had every right to feel betrayed, understand? "I'm sorry, Lucas," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for not being here for you. I wish I could have been, but I was lost. And now, I want to be a part of your life. I want to make things right." Lucas didn't respond right away. He just stared at him, his small fists clenched at his sides. Ethan could see the confusion, the anger, the hurt, all mixed in the boy's eyes, and it broke his heart. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to make a better future. "I know I can't make up for lost time," Ethan continued, his voice softer now. "But I want to try. I want to get to know you if you'll let me." There was a long pause, and then Lucas spoke, his voice small but filled with an edge of defiance. "Why didn't you come before?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had no answer that would make sense to a 12-year-old boy, no explanation that would take away the pain of all the years he had missed. "I didn't know how to find you," Ethan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "And even when I didn't know how to come back. But I should have tried harder. I should have been there." Lucas looked away, his eyes fixed on the ground. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything left unsaid. Emily stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, watching the interaction quietly, her face unreadable. Ethan could feel the weight of her gaze, the silent judgment. She had every right to be skeptical. She had been the one who had raised their son alone, who had carried the weight of this secret for so long. She had every reason to question whether Ethan was truly ready to step into their lives, to truly be the man and father he was promising to be. "I don't know if I want to get to know you," Lucas said quietly, his voice shaky. "You weren't here. You didn't care." The words stung, but Ethan didn't flinch. He had earned every bit of that anger, every bit of that resentment, and he would take it if it meant proving that he was ready to fight for this. "I understand," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. "But I want you to know that I do care. I've always cared, I just didn't know how to show it." Lucas looked up at him, his expression softening just a little. "You can't just show up and say that, you know. You have to actually do something." Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I know, and I'm going to prove it. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Lucas met his gaze, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, and that was all Ethan needed. "Can we go get ice cream now?" Lucas asked, his voice tentative, as if testing the waters, unsure if it was too soon to ask for something normal, something that might feel like a family. Ethan's heart swelled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Ice cream sounds perfect," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Let's go." As they walked toward the small ice cream shop near the park, Ethan glanced over at Emily. There was still so much to work through, so many walls to break down, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was on the right path. This wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be quick, but it was a chance. A chance he would fight for every single day, and that was all he could ask for. The weeks that followed were a blur of small steps forward and moments of painful reflection. Ethan's attempts to bond with Lucas were slow, cautious, and often filled with awkward silences. But there were glimmers of hope, small moments where Lucas would smile at him, even if it was just for a second. He would make eye contact, offer a laugh at something Ethan said, or even join him for a quick game of basketball at the local park. But as much progress as they made, there was still so much distance between them. Lucas wasn't ready to fully open up, and Ethan, despite his determination, had to accept that winning back his son's trust was not going to happen overnight. He couldn't erase the years of absence, the years of pain and confusion, with a few kind gestures. It was going to take time. Emily, too, was distant. Though she had allowed Ethan into their lives, she remained cautious. She had seen how quickly things could fall apart, how easily promises could be broken, and despite her clear desire to protect Lucas, there was also something in her eyes whenever she looked at Ethan, a hesitation, as though she was still uncertain whether this new version of him was the man she could trust. Ethan felt the tension between them every time they spoke. Every time they interacted, he could feel her watching him, waiting for him to fail. But he was determined not to. He had already lost too much, and he wasn't about to let his second chance slip away. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan received a message from Emily. She wanted to meet. The brief, cryptic message sent a wave of unease through him. It wasn't often that she reached out on her own, especially not in the late hours of the night. He agreed to meet her at the same park where they had first spoken about Lucas. It was a place that held so many memories for them, some good, most of them painful, but it had become a sort of neutral ground for their new, tentative relationship. The space between them still felt fragile, but at least they were speaking. When Ethan arrived, Emily was already sitting on a bench, looking out over the darkened park. The moonlight cast a soft glow on her face, and for a moment she looked like the woman he had once loved, the woman he had lost. But the years between them were evident in the lines on her face, in the way she carried herself now, more guarded, more distant. She didn't look at him when he sat beside her. Instead, she kept her gaze focused on the empty playground in front of them. There was a silence between them, one that was thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. "I've been thinking about everything," Emily said finally, her voice low but steady. "About you, about Lucas, and about us." Ethan's heart pounded as he turned to face her. "I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I just need a chance to show you, to show Lucas that I'm here for both of you, that I'm not going anywhere." She turned to him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else, something more vulnerable. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Ethan. I don't know if I can open up to you like I did before. You hurt me, and you hurt Lucas. I can't just forget that." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know you can't. I'm not asking you to forget, but I need you to know that I've changed. I'm not the man I was before. I want to prove that to you, to both of you." Emily looked away again, her fingers playing with the fabric of her jacket. For a moment, Ethan thought she might walk away, that this would be another dead-end conversation. But then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if Lucas will ever forgive you for not being there. He's angry, he's confused, and I don't know if he'll ever understand why you left." She paused, and Ethan could hear the cracks in her voice, the vulnerability she rarely showed. "But I don't know how to help him if you're not willing to fight for him too." "I'm fighting, Emily," Ethan said urgently, reaching out and taking her hand, surprising them both. "I'm fighting for him. I'm fighting for you. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I won't leave again." Emily's eyes flickered to his hand, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she seemed to let the words sink in, the quiet resolve in his voice breaking through some of her defenses. "I'm not sure how we get past everything," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "but I want to try. For Lucas, for us. But it won't be easy, Ethan. I won't just let you in because you're sorry. I need to see that you're really ready. That you're ready to be there, no matter how difficult it gets." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. "I'll prove it to you. Every day, I'll prove it to you. I know I can't undo the past, but I can show you that I'm here, and I'm never leaving again." For the first time in a long while, Emily seemed to soften. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, though she blinked them away before they could fall. "You're asking me to believe in something I'm not sure I can believe in again, but maybe we can try." Ethan's heart soared as he squeezed her hand. We'll take it one step at a time." The silence between them was no longer filled with resentment or unspoken anger. It was still uncertain, still fragile, but there was hope, a glimmer of it. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was on the right path, not just with Emily, but with Lucas too. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking it alone anymore. He had a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. He wasn't going to lose them again. Not now, not ever. As they sat there in the quiet of the park, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hung between them. But there was also a sense of quiet resolve, a belief that despite everything, they could rebuild what had been broken. Together, the weeks following the heart-to-heart in the park were a turning point for Ethan. With Emily's cautious acceptance, he had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to rebuild the life they once dreamed of. Slowly, he began to see the cracks in the walls Emily had built around her heart. Each small gesture of kindness, each moment where Lucas softened, whether it was accepting an ice cream or playing video games together, felt like progress, like the impossible was becoming possible again. But the weight of what Ethan had done, the hurt he had caused, still lingered. Trust, once shattered, trust, once, didn't heal overnight. Emily's hesitations were a constant reminder that their past wasn't so easily erased. And Lucas, his son, was still distant. Ethan could see the boy's need for affection, for connection, but every time Ethan tried to get closer, Lucas pulled back. He wasn't ready, and Ethan understood. What had been lost couldn't be regained with a few kind words or even grand gestures. The years were too many, the wounds too deep. Ethan had made it his mission to prove that he could be the father Lucas needed. But proving himself to Emily was a different challenge altogether. Every night, Ethan lay awake thinking of their conversations, what had been said, what had been left unsaid. Emily was right. He had to show up every day and never give up. One evening, as he arrived at Emily's apartment to pick up Lucas for a small family outing, he found himself standing at the door, fighting the urge to knock and wait. His nerves were raw. Would she be there? Would she allow him to spend time with her son without all the tension, the uncertainty? When Emily answered the door, her face was soft, less guarded than it had been before, but still cautious. "Ready?" she asked, the question light, but her eyes heavy with something Ethan couldn't quite read. "I am," he said, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. "Thank you, Emily, for this." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in, and for a moment, they were just two people, two parents, standing in a living room filled with memories. There was still so much work to do, so many pieces to put back together. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a flicker of something like hope. Lucas came down the stairs shortly after, his expression a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The same familiar wariness he had always worn when Ethan was around. But there was something different in his eyes. Something that made Ethan believe that Lucas was beginning to understand that his father was here to stay. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said softly, crouching down to the boy's level. "Ready to get some ice cream?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He simply nodded, and Ethan could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But there was no rejection, no refusal. That was all Ethan needed. An opening, just a crack in the wall Lucas had built around himself. They drove in silence, the tension palpable, but not as suffocating as it had been before. Emily sat in the front seat, quiet but present, the calm balance between her son and Ethan. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. When they arrived at the ice cream shop, Lucas hesitated for a moment before finally stepping out of the car. Ethan followed, walking alongside him, feeling the weight of every step. "So what's your favorite flavor?" Ethan asked, trying to make small talk, to bridge the gap between them. Lucas glanced up at him briefly before responding, his voice low. "Chocolate chip!" Ethan grinned. "Good choice. Me too." They stood in line together, each in their own space, yet sharing this small moment, a simple, normal thing, but one that felt like a monumental victory to Ethan. Emily joined them in line, and for the first time he noticed her glance at him with a softness that hadn't been there before. She had seen what he was willing to do for Lucas, for them, and maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe in him again. After they sat down with their ice cream, Lucas took a hesitant bite, his eyes flickering from Ethan to Emily. It was a small thing, but to Ethan it meant the world. "I know it's going to take time," Ethan said quietly as he watched his son. "But I'm here, Lucas. Every day, I'm here." Lucas didn't respond right away. Instead, he focused on his ice cream, the silence between them settling comfortably. But then, after a moment, Lucas spoke, his voice barely audible but clear. "I don't hate you anymore," he said, looking up at Ethan. Ethan's chest tightened at the words. They weren't an apology, and they certainly weren't a declaration of full acceptance. But they were enough to tell him that Lucas was starting to open up, that the boy he had been so afraid of losing was beginning to trust him again. "I'm glad to hear that," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't hate you either, Lucas. I want to be here, for you." Emily watched the exchange, and for the first time in weeks she didn't look away. She didn't retreat into herself. She was watching them, her son and the man who had hurt them both, begin to find their way back to each other. As they finished their ice cream, the evening felt easy, comfortable. The tension had dissipated. The distance between them, though still there, had closed by just a little. And though the road ahead would still be long and filled with challenges, Ethan knew something had changed. Something had shifted in the way they all interacted. There was a possibility now where there had been none before. Later that night, as they said their goodbyes, Emily turned to Ethan, her eyes softer than they had been in months. She didn't say anything, but her gaze held more than words could express. Thankfulness, forgiveness, and something deeper. Something he couldn't name. "Thank you," she said simply, and Ethan knew it was more than just about the evening. It was about everything, the journey they had begun, the family they were rebuilding. "I'll keep proving it," he said quietly, his voice steady with the promise. As he walked back to his car, Ethan felt something shift inside him, a weight lifted, a burden eased. He had come so far, and while the past could never be erased, the future was his to shape. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan believed that everything could still be rebuilt, piece by piece, day by day. The family he had lost, the love he had abandoned, it was all within reach again. They were not perfect, but they were trying, and that was enough. That was everything. Ethan turned the key in the ignition, the hum of the engine beneath him reminding him that the hardest part was over. The rest would come in time, but for now, as he drove home, he couldn't help but smile. His life was finally heading in the direction he had always wanted, toward love, toward family, toward redemption. And he wasn't alone anymore. The future, for the first time in years, looked bright.